Hellblazer Podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Hellblazer number 4, and just a little catch up on what was going on in the last couple issues. John discovered in the poor part of town that a bunch of yuppies were moving in and like gentrifying the area. And then it turned out that those were actually demons, and they were going around brokering in souls, getting people to trade their soul away for stock in Hell's Infernal Dollar, which was going up at the time because it was election day and the Conservative Party was supposed to win. So Hell had been betting on them, and John was able to bluff them and make them think that the Liberals were going to win. And that actually crashed the market for the demon stockbrokers. And with the market crash, all the demons pulled out of that area of town. But at the same time, John was captured and he was left hanging upside down in a bar called The Pits. And the TV was on and no one else was there to help him get down or turn the TV off. And John had to sit and watch Maggie Thatcher win the election. And that is where we left off in the last issue. So first things first, with issue 4, we got the cover here. We see a dilapidated house from the inside, and we get a girl, like the shadow of a girl who looks kind of sad. She's in what looks like a wedding dress and she's holding some flowers. There's a large spider web in the area surrounding her. And in the background of the house, we see the shadow of John Constantine. And we also see that this is written by Jamie Delano with art by John Ridgway. And we start off on the first page with a young girl who is at a park by herself, and she seems pretty depressed. And her narration says, "Gemma is fed up. Even the rotten park is empty. It's getting late now, and she'd promised she'd come home after posting off the pyramid videos. But home's not the same anymore, since they moved out here to the suburbs. She'd been much happier living in her old street, where her friends and her uncle were, even though her dad was on the dole, always in a bad fit and rowing with her ma'am about money. The old house was dark and cozy with nice, warm, secret smells. Why did the Resurrection Crusaders have to come and show their light to her mom and dad? It's dazzled them. You could see it shining in their eyes. The Crusaders had told her dad they were living in the armpit of Satan. Now that the Lord's looking after them, they have to live in the new house that smells of paint and it's got too many windows. She hates it here. Everything's new and looks like it's made of Lego. It's not fair. Nobody's asked her if she wanted to move. Even if the Lord had given her dad the job selling pyramids, she still had rights. But when you're a kid, you just can't win." So it seems like this girl Gemma is sad because her family has moved somewhere new where her dad got a job with the Resurrection Crusade, she called it, who seemed to be some kind of Christian organization. But she liked everything better when they were on government assistance and they lived by her friends and her uncle. Then we get to John Constantine, who is at a bar, and it looks like he's playing billiards with some fellows and possibly swindling them as they bet on the game. And his narration says, "Sometimes you just can't lose. You're on the shining path, and the synchronicities are winking all around you, like pennies from heaven. You just have to pocket them." Then John makes a shot, and the other men around him that are watching him play say, "Brill, magic shot, John." And in the next scene, we see them paying him money because I guess they were betting on the game, and his narration says, "Magic? Suppose it is, sort of. Sometimes it's as easy as riding a bike, though. Just keep pedaling and don't throw any wobblies." So as John pockets his winnings, he notices a man banging on a slot machine, and the man saying, "Soldering machine's fixed." And as he bangs on it, the bartender yells, "Oi, behave yourself or you're barred." And then John walks up to him and says, "Hello, Chaz. You pick up the winnings?" And Chaz turns away from the slot machine and says, "Yeah, You're a lucky bleeder, mate. Child bride? 40 to 1 outsider? What made you back that no-hoper? Then Chaz steps away from the machine that he was playing on, and John comes over and he puts a coin in and he says, it was just a smart guess, pal. Cheers. And Chaz replies, sure, tell that to Eddie Flynn. It was touch and go whether he paid up or broke me legs. Then John smiles at him and says, don't even worry about it. Even bookies have to learn to lose sometimes. See ya. And then John begins to walk away and Chaz calls after him, ain't you even going to buy me a drink for me trouble then? And John replies, buy your own, chum. And then he kind of nods back to the machine. And then all of a sudden, the machine that Chaz was playing on hits the jackpot and it begins spitting out a whole bunch of coins. And that was actually a cool little scene because that was the first introduction of Chaz, who's one of John's friends that appears fairly regularly in the series. So John walks out of the bar and we get some narration as he walks down the street. And it says, some days, just now and then, it's good to be alive. You're ready for anything. Love, adventure, death, or glory. It doesn't matter which. It's the appetite that counts. Talking of appetite reminds me. My stomach thinks my throat's been cut. I need sustenance, but what? I'm sick of Chinese food. The Mexican place is too far. Perhaps Indian. I could murder an Indian. An Indian meal, that is. And he specifies that because as he turns the corner, he sees a couple of teenage boys spray painting the words, British boys kill Packies on the wall. And we see these teenagers are two young men who have shaved heads and they are wearing matching shirts that say British boys on them. And John's narration continues. Not like these little morons who stuffed lighted rags through Asians' letterboxes. So it seems that these boys are in fact part of a gang that's like a white nationalist neo-Nazi group. And John, of course, likes to mess with these kind of people. So he walks up to the boys and he grabs the spray paint out of one of their hands and he sprays one of them in the face with it. And then John just drops the can and walks away and laughs. Tossers. Pity it wasn't mace. And the boys yell after him, bastard! But he just keeps walking and his narration continues. All I'm short of is a stimulating dinner companion. Still, a day like this, you never know who's around the corner, do you? And then as he approaches the corner of an alleyway, his narration says, it's got to be worth a look. So he peeks around the corner into the alley. He sees a woman sitting cross-legged on the ground with spray paint of her own. And John says to her, hello, what's all this then? Revolutionary street art or a government training scheme? And the woman replies to him, why don't you choose? You're the clever dick. It's all swings and roundabouts to me. And we see the name of this issue is called Waiting for the Man. And I should just say this woman looks very interesting. She's wearing a long sleeve, billowy zebra print shirt. She's got big metal earrings that match her necklace. She is a white woman in her 20s. She has blue eyeshadow on her eyelids. And she has big 80s hair, like it looks like it kind of sticks up. That's black, but then she has two streaks on either side of her head of white. She kind of looks like Blondie or someone like that from the 80s. Someone a little bit more punk or into the mod scene. Then we cut back to the little girl from the beginning, and she's now swinging on a swing set in that same park. And her narration says, why do grown-ups always have to know best? Gemma wishes she was old enough to live on her own. Then she could do as she liked. It's getting dark now, and the mist from the river is making the park spooky. It's scary, but she likes it. She really should go home, though. But she just can't face it. It's so boring. Her dad's taken all her Madonna cassettes away, and she won't be able to watch TV because the stupid Resurrection Crusaders say it's all adverts for Satan. All she's allowed to watch now are the horrible pyramid of prayer videos her mom and dad sell. She hates the way those big American men wave their arms and shout about the Lord and Satan all the time. They all have that funny look in their eyes, glassy, like the kids who sniff glue. Ma'am and Dad'll be worried by now. In a funny way, she's glad. Serves 'em right if a creepo caught her. Anyway, the Lord was supposed to look after her nowadays. Let him earn his keep. Then, while Gemma is swinging, all of a sudden she's startled by someone saying, hello, what's your name then? And the narration says, the sudden voice nearly shakes her off the swing. And she turns around to see who is talking, and when she does, she sees three girls standing there. They look to be about her age. There are two white girls with red and blonde hair and a black girl. And Gemma answers their question saying, Gemma Masters, why'd you sneak up on me like that? You fripped me nearly to death. And the narration says, the girls are a bit older than her, but not much. They could be friends. Their darting eyes give her a once-over, checking her out. And the black girl says to Gemma, you're out late. And Gemma replies, what of it? So are you. And then Gemma stands up from the swing and turns around to look at them, and the narration says, Gemma meets their stares. Where she comes from, you learn to give as you get, whether it be friendship or fat lips. But they don't attack her or anything, and the black girl asks her another question saying, do you live around here then? And Gemma answers, yeah, but me dad's bossy, so I stop out. What about you? And the black girl replies, our house isn't far. And the blonde cuts in saying, we do what we like. And the redhead chimes in, as long as he says it's all right. And Gemma asks, who's he? And the redhead replies, him. It's his house where we live. And the blonde says, we're married to him. And Gemma's confused by that, and she says, married? What, all of you? You can't be. You're too young. And the black girl replies, we are too. And not wanting to start an argument or anything, Gemma just continues asking, so what's it like? And the redhead says, it's great. It's a really boss, neat house. And the blonde chimes in, he brings us a lot of presents. And the black girl says, and he's hardly ever there. And I'm not sure if there's something supernatural going on, but Gemma kind of falls in line with this whole marriage talk, and she says, it sounds brilliant. Do you think he'd marry me? And the blonde says, I don't know. Why don't you come home with us and see? And Gemma replies, all right. You got any grub there? I'm starving. Then we cut back to John, and he is now at an Indian restaurant eating dinner with the woman that he found in the alleyway. And the narration says, the girl goes through the menu like a plague of locusts. I enjoy watching her eat. She fascinates me. After 20 quid's worth of curry, all I know is her name. And then John is saying to her, Zed? That's not much of a name. And Zed replies, it's enough. And John's narration says, I suppose it is, but I want to know more. And John asks her, where do you come from then? You're not a Londoner. And she replies, does it matter? Where do any of us come from? The sordid passions of our parents? God's emporium of jokes? It's where we are that counts, man. The rest is just getting here. And John says, so young and yet so cynical? And Zed replies, I may be young, but I'm not a child. Cut the crap, Constantine. You know the score. I was waiting. You found me. I don't know what I was waiting for. You don't know what you found. And Zed doesn't beat around the bush at all. She just straight up asks John, now, do you fancy me or not? And then John's narration says, like I said, pennies from heaven. First rule of gambling, never walk away from a winning streak. They don't last forever. So John makes his move and asks her, you got a little nest somewhere we could go and burrow into then? And Zed replies, what's the matter? Afraid if we go to your place, you won't be able to get rid of me? And then she stands up and begins to walk out, and you could tell she's expecting him to follow, and she says to him, Christ, I don't want to marry you. Come on. Then we cut back to Gemma and the three girls, and they're bringing Gemma back to their house, and the narration says, finally, they arrive at the house in the wood. Gemma's tired but happy. The girls like her. They want her in their family. And we see them approaching the house, and it definitely looks old and dilapidated. I think the windows are even boarded up. And the blonde girl says, this is where we live. Do you like it? And Gemma replies, it's a bit dirty. And then instantly Gemma feels bad, and her narration says, she wishes she hadn't said it. She's hurt their feelings. And the blonde kind of snaps at her as they enter the house saying, well, if you're too proud, you don't have to stay. And as Gemma walks in, she says, no, I want to, honest. It's lovely, really. And we get a shot of inside the house as she enters, and it is not lovely. There is just trash everywhere in this house. The walls are falling apart like the plaster's coming off. It definitely looks like this house is abandoned. And as Gemma looks around, the black girl says, you don't like it too tidy. You'll get used to it. You won't notice the smell either once you're married. And the narration says, he. The word sends a little shiver through her, like the cold draft from the door when she was little and playing on the kitchen floor and her dad came home from work. And Gemma asks the girls, do you think he'll let me stay? And the redhead says, yeah, he'll be really pleased we found you. And the narration says, her head is light, but her eyes are heavy. She needs to lie down. And Gemma says to the girls, I'm sleepy. And the redhead beckons her up the stairs and says, you can nap in his bed with us. he won't be home tonight. Then we cut to all four girls in the same bed, and they've got the covers pulled over themselves, and the narration says, it's cozy, all together in the big bed. Gemma feels safe, as if she's in a lovely dream. And then Gemma looks over at the redhead and notices a mark on her neck, and she asks, what's that mark on your neck? It looks sore. And the redhead answers, this? It's my wedding ring. We've all got one. Don't worry, it only hurts for a moment. Then it's real nice. And we see what she's talking about is ligature marks, like strangulation marks on her neck from some sort of rope or cable. So it's becoming pretty obvious that these little girls are not what they seem. Something is up with them. Obviously, if they have marks of strangulation and whatnot, something supernatural is going on here. Then we cut back to John and Zed, and they are in Zed's apartment, and John's narration says, Zed's place is not at all what I expected. And I guess what he expected was a much lower rent apartment, because John is looking out the window and it's got like a scenic view of the city. And then as he walks around, there's definitely a lot of room in here. It's not a small place at all. So as John looks out the window, Zed says, yuppies had paid millions for this view. I get it for free and that makes it priceless. And John says to her, I'm impressed. It's like a bloody cathedral. And Zed replies, I'm glad you like it. And John says, you live here on your own then? And then he looks around at the walls and it seems Zed has painted a bunch of different faces of people all over the walls. And he continues saying, still, I suppose the faces keep you company. And as John gets a closer look at the faces on the wall, Zed says, they're all real. People I see on the street. I collect them. And John points to a couple and says, here, I know some of these. And then he sees a familiar face staring back at him, and it's actually his face. And he says, Struth, which I actually had to look up the meaning of that word. And apparently it's old British slang that is used to exclaim surprise. So John turns around thinking that maybe she's tricking him or something, and he stares at her and the narration says, I watch her body as she moves it towards me. She returns my candid gaze. A ghost of humor entices my attention to the corner of her mouth. Is she laughing at me? Excitement builds, rocking my equilibrium with anticipation of... And then his narration is cut off by the radio just turning on all by itself, and a news report comes on saying, finally, tonight on Merseyside, a police search is underway after 10-year-old Gemma Masters failed to return home this evening. And Zed says, sorry, it does that sometimes. Must be a loose switch. And then she goes to turn it off and John says, no, leave it. And the radio continues. So far, 4 children have disappeared in the city this month. And then John gets very serious and he says, damn. I knew it was too good to be true. And then he turns to Zed and asks, can you drive? And she replies, yes, but... And she's cut off by John as he turns around and begins to walk out and says, come on then, I'll get hold of a car. We need to get to Liverpool. That's my sister's kid. Then we cut to the inside of a house where we see a man and a woman, and the woman is crying, and behind them there are 3 men in suits, and the narration says, suburban Liverpool, in the clean new home of Tony and Cheryl Masters. Tragedy thrashes wildly about itself. Despair hurls its nebulous weight at the walls of incomprehension. And then we see a glass shatter on the wall, and Cheryl is saying, where's my little girl? Someone bring her to me. Why has this happened? And her husband, Tony, is saying, don't, love. It'll be all right. We'll get her back. The Crusaders are with us. God's warriors are out searching. Word of our need is being spread through the network. But Cheryl doesn't seem too calm by this. And then one of the 3 men behind them, who looks to be the leader, says, thousands of your fellow Crusaders are linked in the Pyramid of Prayer. And we can see behind this man, there's a painting on their walls that is of people praying, and they're raising their hands that are clasped together above their heads. And the way that they're arranged, it looks like they're in a pyramid. So this seems to be the weird Resurrection Crusade that Gemma was talking about that her dad works for. And they seem to be some kind of Christian cult. And that man continues saying, rest yourself, child. Trust in the Lord. But Cheryl's not having any of that, and she says, no, I'm not a child. I'm a mother. Some pervert's got Gemma, and he's doing things to her. I want my baby now. And the church representative says to her, then you must pray. A demon of hell has attacked a sinful weakness in the stockade of righteousness. Only faith will repair the flaw. And then Cheryl smacks him in the face and says, are you saying it's her fault? You mealy-mouthed bastard! And Tony is horrified by her actions, and he says, Cheryl, don't! But the man from the Resurrection Crusade, who kind of looks like George Bush, I should say, which makes sense because he was vice president at the time. He adjusts his glasses and he says, "The woman is distraught. She disrupts the prayer energy. I suggest you restrain her, Brother Tony." And then Tony, like the spineless loser he is, turns to his wife and says, "Don't talk to Elder Martin like that, Cheryl." And Cheryl looks at him with disbelief and says, "What? You heard what he said?" And Tony replies, "I think he's right. There's been a bad spirit in the girl since we started working with the Crusade." And Cheryl doesn't want to hear any more of this, so she runs up the stairs and she says, "Stay away from me, you traitor!" Then we cut to John and Zed, and we don't see them, but we see a car driving on a freeway. And as it drives, the narration says, "Halfway there. An hour and a half on the motorway. And Chaz's old Cortina is rattling us through Birmingham. Zed's only got one speed. Flat out. Suits me." And then from outside the car, we hear Zed say, "Your friend wasn't too keen to lend you his car." And John replies, "Nah, he should be out earning. His missus will give him hell. Tough. He still owes me for a favor." And Zed says, "Remind me to never get in your debt." And John replies, "You can't avoid it, darling. It's what men and women are all about." And Zed replies, "Constantine, you've got the heart of a banker." And John replies, "But the soul of a gambler. It's what makes me so irresistible." And then Zed changes topics saying, "What's your niece like?" And John's narration says, "I watched the wipers high-kicking wetly across the stage of the windshield. I'm glad she used the present tense." And John answers her saying, "Gemma's a good kid. Sound as a pound. Cheryl, too, her mom." And Zed asks, "Your sister?" And John replies, "Yeah, it's her old man Tony who's the pain in the arse. Last I heard, he'd got them involved in some barmy fundamentalist sect, pyramid selling salvation or some such nonsense. He's a right wet week." And then John cuts off the conversation saying, "I think I'll have a bit of a nap." And Zed replies, "Huh, now I'm a bloody taxi driver?" And John's narration says, "No point in us both being knackered. Anyway, a bit of positive dreaming never want to miss. The tires sigh wetly to the road as the night sucks us northwards. I hope that somewhere Gemma has a dry place to sleep and a friendly face to wake up to. Course, she could already be dead." Then we cut to Gemma, and she is waking up in the bed, and her narration says, "Where is she? What day is this?" Opening her eyes, Gemma glimpses the tail of her dream as it vanishes into the darkness of lost memory. It was something about her Uncle John. He was riding a racehorse into a church. There was a wedding going on. Of course. How could she have forgotten? Today is her wedding day. And then she gets out of the bed and her narration continues. Her new friends are still sleeping. She slips from the warm bed. The floor is still chilled to her feet. Something doesn't feel quite right. She can't remember arriving at this place. Outside, a lonely bird bubbles its liquid song in the still air. For a moment, remembering her ma'am and her dad, who she's left behind. She's sad. Tears scald her cheeks, but by the time her tongue savors their salt, she's forgotten why she's crying. Then Gemma hears something behind her, and she turns around, and she sees the three girls are standing there, and they have a wedding dress in their hands, and the redhead is saying to her, "Come on, time to get ready. This is your big day." So the girls begin to help her remove her clothes and put on the wedding dress, and as they do, the narration says, "Her friends do her proud, primping and preening her. The dress makes her feel like Princess Di. Excitement makes her tremble. What will it be like?" She knows about weddings, of course. At least she thinks she does. But she can't quite remember what's supposed to happen. Never mind. Her friends would look after her, tell her what to do. And then as the girls finish putting the veil on her, they take her over to a mirror so she can see herself, and the blonde says to her, "Wow, you look a picture. He'll be home soon. He's really going to fall for you." Then we see the taxi that John and Zed are in pull up to his sister's house, and we can see that there are already police on site. And the narration says, "On the new estate, all the houses look the same, but we don't have any trouble finding the right one." And John looks at the policeman and he says, "Christ, it's a bloody toy town, complete with policeman plod." And then the policeman shouts at them, "No press allowed. You buzzards can sling your hook." But John and Zed don't really pay attention to him. They get out of the car, and Zed walks over to him and says, "Cheek, do I look like a bloody journo?" And as John walks past, he says, "We're relatives, pal." And the cop says to him, "Oh, sorry. We're trying to keep the papers off this one. What with them God's warriors charging all over the place. Bloody vigilantes, that's all we were short of." And John hears this and comments, "Vigilantes, huh? It's getting a bit surreal, isn't it?" And then John walks up to the front door and he pushes the doorbell, and the narration says, "Appallingly, the doorbell plays a 30-second rendition of Abide With Me." But then Cheryl opens the door and she is crying her eyes out, and the narration says, "Cheryl's grief is real enough. It's etched into her face like an acid attack." And she's saying to John, "John, thank God. I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do." And John tries to calm her, saying, "It's okay, pet. I'll sort it out if I can." And then John walks into the living room where we see the three gentlemen from the Resurrection Crusade and Tony, her husband. And John's narration says, "Tony's in the front room with a set of characters who hover like vultures. My entrance ruffles their feathers." And as Tony sees John come in, he says, "I don't know why you've come, John. There's nothing to be done." And John replies to him sarcastically, "It just shows what you know, mate. We'll start with a spot of divining." And then the head Resurrection Crusade guy steps forward and says, "No, I forbid it. If you use the black arts, the Lord will surely turn his back on the girl." And John looks at the man with contempt and says, "Forbid away, chum, and don't give me that Dennis Wheatley black arts crap. I don't give a toss what you think. Gemma's missing. I'm going to find her. You're going to stay out of my way. Get it?" Then we cut to Gemma's room upstairs in the house, and John is talking with Cheryl as Zed looks around the room. And John's narration says, "Gemma's room's like a nun's cell. No furry animals, no pop posters." And John is saying to Cheryl, "Christ, what have you been up to? What's all this Resurrection Crusade garbage?" And Cheryl replies, "Don't knock it, John. It's kept me and Tony together. It's hard times being out of work in the city these days. The Pyramid of Prayer supports us. We've already made enough to buy this house." And John replies, "Yeah, God's always been big business." Then on the bed next to John, Zed dumps out one of Gemma's keepsake boxes, and she says, "Here, this should do the trick." And John looks at the items on the bed, and the narration says, "A few pebbles from a beach, costume jewelry, some glass marbles, and the little wooden crocodile I bought her from Senegal. A child's treasure, more precious than a dragon's hoard." So John takes the wooden crocodile that he had got Gemma, and he puts a string around its tail, and then he dangles it above a map of the nearby area, and the narration says, "Divining's a sort of sympathetic magic, a way of concentrating the wish to find by using something close to the subject to focus it." While the crocodile circles sniffing over the street plan, Zed rattles the marbles in her hand and scribbles furiously. So Zed is sitting next to John as he's divining, and she's drawing on a notepad because she's also got some kind of psychic thing going on. And the narration continues, "Within minutes, I've got a map reference, and she's come up with a drawing of a house. Automatic drawing, huh? The girl's full of surprises." And then John says to her jokingly, "You trying to upstage me or what? Come on, we'll slip out the back. I don't want the old cop plodding along behind us. Keep your fingers crossed, Cher. We'll do our best." Then we cut back to the house where Gemma is waiting in her wedding dress with the three other girls for the man to come home. And the narration says, "Waiting for the man. Gemma feels like she's always been waiting for the man. There's a big empty space inside her. She feels strange, excited, and scared. But the girls reassure her. It'll be different soon, they say, when she's married. When she has a husband, she'll be one of them. There's a sound at the door. The waiting is over. The man has come home." So Gemma looks at the door expectantly. We see the door open and the man walk in. And compared to her on the chair, he looks gigantic. He's a white guy with a cutoff shirt so you can see his arm muscles. And he's got pants on that look like army fatigues. And as the man comes through, he looks at Gemma, and her narration says, "At first, he just looks at her. She feels dizzy. But does he like her?" And then the man walks towards her, and her narration continues. "He comes closer. He smells sweet and musty like wet leaves. But does he want her for his wife?" And then the man grabs her by the chin and tilts her head back so he can get a better look at her. And he says, "What's your name, pretty one?" And she replies, "Gemma." And the man repeats, "Gemma." And her narration says, "It thrills her the way he says it. This is how it's meant to be, isn't it?" And then the man looks at her and asks, "Will you marry me, Gemma, and stay forever?" And she replies, "Yes." And her narration says, "It's what she's supposed to say." Then he takes her by the hand and begins pulling her down into the basement. And he says to her, "Then come downstairs. We'll have the ceremony and be happy ever after." Then we cut back to John and Kit, who are going around the area, asking the local townsfolk if they've seen Gemma, and the narration says, "We search all day. The chance of a happy ending grows slimmer by the hour. There are a lot of houses in the area the crocodile divined, none of which looks like Zed's drawing." We see John leaning against the car while he talks to Zed as she looks around, and he's saying to her, "You could have drawn something useful like a street sign." And Zed replies, "Be reasonable, John. It doesn't work like that. You have to take what you're given. The rest is down to luck." And John replies, "It's true. Magic's always been a risky business, but I'm not in a reasonable mood. We've got to get a result here or Gemma's dead for sure." And then there's a boy that happens to be walking by, and he sees John and Gemma, and they kind of look out of place, so he asks, "Are you lost, mister?" And John replies, "Hopelessly. You know where this house is, kid?" And John holds up the picture Zed drew, and the kid takes a look at it, and he says, "Yeah, give us a $5 and I'll take you. It's haunted, you know. You'll have to walk, though. I ain't going in no car with strangers." So the kid leads the way, and John's narration says, "Smart kid. He takes us by the secret routes, known only by children and cats." So we see them walking through an overgrown field over a hill, and we cut to them a couple minutes later as they arrive at the house, and the boy is saying, "That's it. Ain't going no further, not even for 50 quid. And John's narration says, "I don't blame him. He's got no reason to. I give him another $5 to take a message up to Cheryl's house." And as the boy walks away, John calls to him, "Don't hang about. You can't miss it. There's coppers all over." And Zed looks at the house and says, "This is the place." And John's narration agrees. "She's right. I don't want to go inside. There are some things no one in their right mind would want to see." Then we cut to inside the house in the basement, where we see there is an altar that has an upside down cross in front of it with a goat's head nailed to it. And standing on the other side of the altar, the man has his hands up like he's doing some kind of ceremony or ritual, and Gemma is standing next to him, and the other girls are in the room as well, and they're watching. And the narration says, "In the white dress, Gemma feels as if she shines. She's shy, but the veil hides her awkwardness. The service is lovely. The man's voice, deep and strong, it surrounds her. She doesn't understand the words, but their sound makes her feel humble. She almost cries. She doesn't deserve this kindness, this love." And the man is saying, "Witness here today this union. Bestow your blessing upon your servant and his bride, who stands, willing and eager to do your bidding. For in truth, the brides of your servant shall be your brides also, loving and serving you to the unreaching ends of eternity. Honor is yours, who is Lord of the forgotten realm." And then Gemma says, "Forever and ever, amen." And her narration says, "It seems like the right thing to say." Then the man looks down at her and he pulls up her veil and he says, "Good child, good. Now, come forward, kneel and receive the devil's benediction." So she kneels down and we see the man reach behind him on the altar, and he takes a rope that was on a plate and he begins to wrap it around his hands. And Gemma is watching, and her narration says, "The floor is hard and cold to her knees. There is a sudden smell like cats or meat. For a moment, she thinks a distant voice calls her name. Then she abandons herself to the hands of the ceremony. It's time to tie the knot." And we see the man with the rope tight between his hands approach her and bring the rope to her neck. Then we cut to upstairs where John and Zed are just getting into the house, and John is calling out, "Gemma! Gemma!" And then he waits for a response, and then his narration says, "It's quiet as a tomb." And Zed breaks the silence, saying, "See this, John? TV and VCR? There's a microwave over there." And John's narration says, "I've made my own findings. The place is filthy, and there's a smell that seems to come from upstairs." And John says to Zed, "Wait here, kid." And then John begins to go up the stairs, but Zed does not wait for him. She follows, and John's narration says, "She ignores me and follows. I don't press the point. I'm no chauvinist when it comes to doing the dirty jobs. Beneath our feet, the aging timbers groan in protest, or shame, as we approach the bedroom. Christ, how am I going to tell Cheryl? And then with some trepidation, John opens the door, fearful of what he might find, and the narration says, "The bed is big, spread with a bulging mildewed quilt, and it's not empty." So the two walk in the room cautiously, and they go over to the bed, and as they do, John's narration says, "Zed is albino white. I expect I am too. Neither of us speak. There's no need." Then John reaches out and he pulls back the covers, and the narration continues. "The feet that carry me forward are not part of me. The hand that pulls back the covers isn't mine." And then we get a panel of their shocked faces as they see what's beneath, and the narration says, "There are 3 of them, but none is Gemma. They've all been here far too long." Then John rushes out of the room and down the stairs, and his narration says, "I'll find her. If I have to rip this place apart from top to..." Then he has a realization, and he yells back to Zed, "The cellar! Jesus, the goddamn cellar!" Then we cut to the basement, and Gemma is currently being strangled by the man. He is pulling the rope tight that's twisted around her neck, and her narration says, "The sweet smell of his body wins soothingly into her mind as the hard, gentle hands circle her throat with the cord and tighten it." Then she remembers what the redhead told her, and her narration repeats it, saying, "It only hurts for a minute, then it's really nice." This is what she's been waiting for. Marriage, her wedding ring. A warm darkness wells up around her. In the darkness, something is moving, something that wants to tell her its name. And just at that moment, as Gemma is about to pass out, John Constantine rushes in, and he sees Gemma's limp body in the man's hands, and John yells out, "No! Let her go! Now!" And the narration says, "He discards her carelessly like a forgotten toy. Christ, he's a big bastard." And then John rushes at the man as he drops Gemma to the ground, and the man picks up the plate that was on the altar next to him, and he throws it at John and hits him in the face, which hits John pretty hard because he goes down to his knee, and then the man begins to walk towards him, and John's narration says, "Silly, John, silly. Should have got a weapon." And as the man approaches, he says to John, "I know you. You're bad. You want to hurt me. Take my wives away. I won't let you have them." And then he takes John by the lapels and he shoves him against the wall, causing John's head to smack into it. And John's narration says, "I taste blood. Unfortunately, it's mine." Then the man pulls his torso forward so he can knee John in the crotch, and he says, "In fact, I think I'll kill you." And as John is getting kneed in the groin, he definitely looks like he's in a lot of pain, and his narration says, "I think he might at that. What a bloody stupid way to die." But then the man stops as someone taps him on the shoulder, and as he turns around, he sees Zed behind him say, "Excuse me." And before he has time to react, she swings with all her might with a bottle in her hand and hits him right in the face and says, "Stitch that!" And this definitely works because the man grabs his face and turns away from her, and then she begins a full assault where she smacks him again on the back of the head, which actually breaks the bottle, and then she kicks him in the face and a couple other times until he's not moving on the floor. And John's narration says, "When women fight, they don't pull any punches. She makes a terrible mess of him, but even if I could get up, I wouldn't try to stop her. I'd probably join in. Her fury makes my blood run cold. Her anger's terrible and beautiful. Luckily, it runs out before she kills him." So now that the man is out, John runs over to Gemma to check on her, and his narration says, "The really good news is that Gemma's not dead. I summon the strength to lift her. She moans slightly as if in a sleep, troubled by dark dreams. I don't try to wake her." And as John picks her up and walks past Zed, we see that she's kind of frozen in shock, and the narration says, "Zed's rigid, trembling from adrenaline come down. Shock. I should hug her, say thanks, but I haven't got a free hand. It wasn't even her fight, but she put more of herself on the line. I like her more and more. I think we could be friends." And as John passes Zed, he says to her, "Leave it now, love. The cops will pick up the garbage. Let's get some fresh air." And then as Zed's about to walk away, something catches her eye and she says, "Wait, look at this." And we see what she's looking at. The man is on the ground, still passed out, and his shirt is ripped open from Zed's attack. And we see that written on his chest is a couple of words that are branded into him. And it says, "Damnation Army." And John's narration says, "Against his pallid flesh, the brand is angry, livid purple." And as John looks at the scarring, he says to Zed, Self-mutilation as well, huh? And Zed replies, could be, but I saw it sprayed on a wall in Paddington last week. Somebody burned a tramp at the other end of the alley. And then they both turn to go up the stairs, and John's narration says, thick hairs at the back of my neck stand to attention. Now what the hell is going on? I get the feeling someone's trying to tell me something. We see John and Zed walk out of the house with Gemma in his arms, and his narration says, outside, it's all quiet. The kid probably legged it with my tenor. Then there are sirens in the distance. So it seems that the kid actually did deliver the message to Cheryl and the police, and they arrive shortly after John hears the sirens. And we see Cheryl and Tony running in front of the Resurrection Crusade people through a broken fence around the house and towards John. And Cheryl sees John and Gemma and she says, John? Gemma? Oh, darling, is she? And John replies, she's alive. Dead lucky, though. There's 3 more inside. The head case who had her's locked in the cellar. And then we see a bunch of people come out behind them because there are a bunch more Resurrection Crusade people around, and they're not the 3 guys in suits like before. Those men are still there, but the new ones are all younger, and they have little white t-shirts that say God's Warriors on them, and there's like a sword on the front of it as well. And we see the head Resurrection Crusade man, the guy that looks like George Bush, walks over to John as Cheryl takes Gemma out of his hands, and he says, stand aside, conjurer. But John doesn't pay any attention. He actually walks straight over to Tony, and he begins yelling at him and pointing at Tony's chest and saying, you should take more care of her, mate. Who are these crackpots? And one of the young kids of the God's Warriors says, we are the strong arm of righteousness. We are the agents of divine retribution. But I guess John has had enough excitement for tonight because he doesn't really press the issue, and his narration says, I do as they say. It's an unwise man who gets between the lynch mob and their quarry. I'm no masochist. I avoid pain whenever possible. And we see the God's Warriors people go into the house, and then we cut to a couple minutes later as John is still outside waiting by a tree, and only John is lingering. It seems everybody else has left already, and we see that the house is burning now. And the narration says, minutes later, the scene is a chaos of flickering red and whirling blue. Things are going to get a bit complicated around here. There's nothing more to be done, and I hate to see my name slip into the papers, so I slip away to find Zed. She's already made herself scarce. And as John leaves, we see the police are finally showing up, and they're rushing towards the burning house. Then we cut to a local motel where John is taking a bath, and he's sitting in the bathtub, and his narration says, outside the motel, the sporific hum of the traffic is constant. The hot water is good to my battered body. And then John kind of yells out to Zed, who's in the living room, and says, well, what you might call a hectic first date, huh, kid? And then John stands up and gets out of the bath as she says, yeah, you sure know how to show a girl a good time. And as he dries himself off, John replies, ha, I haven't even started yet. The water's hot if you want to get in. And Zed says, yeah, I will. My flesh is still crawling. So John walks out of the bathroom with his towel on, and then he walks over to her and he gives her a kiss, and his narration says, I know what she means. Damnation Army, huh? Christ. Something's going on. Something I should have noticed before it got this close. You're falling down on the job, John. And then they finish kissing, and Zed goes into the restroom to use the bath, and she leaves the door open a crack, and as John sits on the bed, he says to her, them God's Warriors were a turn up for the book. You strike me as a girl who's been around a bit. Ever come across those bozos before? And she answers from the restroom, no, and I hope I never do again. And as she says this, John kind of turns towards the door that's open, and he sees in the mirror that she is undressing. And to us, we're supposed to think that he's just looking at her because he wants to see her naked, and he's creepy, but that is not what's going on exactly. I'm sure that's part of it. But as he pushes the door open a little bit more so he can get a better look at her body, his narration says, people who aren't afraid of the truth make terrible liars. She hasn't got any brands that I can see so far, but she is lying. And we don't see it, but I think Zed catches him peeping on her, so she slams the door in his face, and he smiles to himself as she does this, and his narration says, I can't tell why yet, but I think I'm going to enjoy investigating further. And that's where we leave this issue with John thinking about having sex with Zed. So if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.